All right, I want to say good morning and welcome to those of you that are on Facebook Live watching with us. We're so glad that you're joining us this morning. It's awesome to have you with us. We hope that you enjoy the morning. Sorry, I'm trying to find my spot in my Bible. There we go. So good to have you joining us on Facebook Live, and just let us know where you're watching from. It would be fantastic. And also to those of you in Exeter, in our second location, we're thankful that you're tuning in this morning as well. I know that it's not the official launch yet in Exeter, but you guys are doing your tech run up there, and from what I hear, we have solved some of the Wi-Fi issues. So we are so grateful that you're tuning in with us this morning. So next Sunday is September 29th, and Exeter has their full public launch. And it's very exciting. If you've driven through Exeter and seen a sign that says something new is coming, it's really caused quite a buzz up there in Exeter. People are wondering, what is coming to town? And then we finally put the name on the sign, and people are, oh, that's what it is. So it's kind of fun and exciting. So Exeter, welcome. Glad you're here today. All right. So, yeah, woo. Yeah, what kind of woo? I love when we get woos. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy, you know? I don't know what it is. So, okay, enough. All right. Wow. Yeah, don't encourage it. You're a wild bunch. Anyway, I needed this morning. I don't know about you, but I needed this morning. That 10,000 Reasons song did me in. Yeah, absolutely. I know it's probably very personal for me in that moment, in that space I was in. I was a wreck. I was like, I'm wiping my eyes, and I was like, oh, what's happening to me? My eyes are leaking, but I think sometimes we just need that reminder of the goodness of God. And I think that to sing those songs like that, even though if we're not singers, and I love Lauren's transparency in that, even if we don't sing on tune at a time, whatever, who cares? It's all music to God's ears. So anyway, you can cut that out of the podcast when it goes on later, whoever's doing that for us, that little moment. Okay, so 1996, my wife and I, Desiree and I, we went to a conference in Chicago. We were wrestling through in that season of our lives whether or not we wanted to continue in our faith journey and continue with church. I had been a youth pastor up until that point for a few years, and some things happened in that first youth pastor experience that really rocked our faith, it rocked our world, and we were questioning whether or not church would be something that would be a regular part of our lives. We were thinking about throwing the towel in. A group of people gathered around us. We had moved to London in 1996, and a group of people gathered around us, and they started nurturing us back to health and to a faith that would eventually ground us. But they took us to a conference in Chicago. Opening session. This is 1996. Opening session. The speaker talked about the church from a way which I had never heard before, and the power in which he demonstrated what the church could be. See, he illustrated it this way. He illustrated it by being a pilot flying at night and looking down and seeing the lights penetrating the darkness of little towns and little villages and small cities that were penetrating the darkness. And he began to describe what the church could be and what the church could become and what the church was designed to be. I can take you to the seat, I can take you to the moment where I was sitting with my wife right beside me and the group of people that we were with, and in that moment, we knew that it was time for us to step back up and to get back in the game and to get involved in church again. We were no longer going to sit in the back row of that church, which was Forest City Community Church at the South End. We were no longer going to sit in the back row. We were meeting in a little public school called Ashley Oaks Public School at the time. There was like 80 of us in the building. We sat in the back row for weeks. And it was in this moment where I thought, I'll sign up for that. We've been talking about Vital Point Church, and we've been talking about church in general over the past number of weeks in our Vitality series. We've been talking about the mission and the identity of the church. See, the mission of the church hasn't changed since Jesus initiated the church mission, was to reach people and help them become fully devoted followers of Him. To become the church that actually makes disciples of Jesus Christ, which in turn makes disciples of others. So the mission is very simple and very clear for the church, is that we are to be salt and light in this world, that we are to live on mission. Yes, the methods have changed, they've evolved, but the mission is always the same. Around here, we talk about this idea of exploring and growing. We are passionate about reaching people who are on a quest of finding the answers to the questions of life, finding the answers to the questions of faith. We're about trying to create an environment where no matter where we find ourselves in our faith journey as a church, whether we're religious or non-religious, church or unchurched, we're together moving forward towards this thing called growing. Our desire is to see people come into a faith relationship with Jesus Christ and then ultimately grow in that relationship. The roots of their faith grow deep and strong and vibrant. There's a vitality to your faith. There's an aliveness to it, an energy. But as we also talked about in the last number of weeks, is we talked about this identity thing. See, the church is identified and built on Jesus Christ, the founder of the Christian church. He is the one, he's the cornerstone. He is the one that holds all this together. And what we've been talking about is that we are the body of Christ in this world. See, oftentimes we misunderstand church. And it's no fault of our own, but it's just how it works. We think about church and we automatically think of a place with a door, with a lock, with a keypad. This morning I was driving up Hyde Park and I saw 2 church buildings that are now like cosmetic buildings. Interesting. And we often think of that's what church is. It's a place. What we begin to understand is our identity is not in a place, it's in a people. Our identity is a people that unlock the presence and the peace of God in this world by the way we live, by the way we act, by the way we respond, by the way we live. Now, the place, I know for some of us, if you've been brought up in church, is often where we land. It's about a place, and there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, funny backstory to this, even this morning I was thinking about this. This week we had a 10-minute blip of a potential spot for us. I say 10 minutes because that's how long it lasted. We found this place. Someone sent me a link. It was like, oh man, this could be a place for us to gather on a regular basis. No more pop up and tear down every Sunday morning. This would be amazing. We called the city and they said, not a chance in the world. 10-minute blip. I want to say to them, do you know who God is? He's a touch bigger than you, and I'm praying that he smites you. No, I didn't say that. That's totally wrong. I didn't do that, just so we're clear. I mean, one day, if God provides, miraculously, there could be a place for us where we don't have to set up and tear down every week, and where we can gather and become, we're here, and this is who we are, and go out from there and bring people and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is that we're about a people. That's what's so wonderful about this right now, is that we're establishing who we are as a people, that we get to unlock the presence and the peace of God by the way we live. Not just in this space, but out. But this morning, I think it's important that we wrap up this conversation by talking about what we smell like. Yeah. Whether you like to admit this or not, you put off a smell. Did you know that? If I came to your house this afternoon for lunch, your house would have a smell. If you came to my place for lunch, there would be a smell. You would know that it's very distinct when you walk into someone's home, right? Sometimes it's like, oh, it smells really good. Sometimes it doesn't smell so good. It's like, oh, they had fish for dinner. Oh. Some of you are like, but it's true. Churches have a smell. Now listen, the smell and what contributes to the smell are values. Yes, there are core beliefs of a church. There's a fundamental foundational beliefs of who Jesus is, who God is, what the Bible is, and the Scriptures and the Holy Spirit, all that. There's those fundamental core doctrinal beliefs that a church is built on, but it is the values that often contribute to the beliefs and the smell of the church. And that's what I want to talk about with you for a few moments. Is what are some of the values that create a smell for us as a church? Maybe these are things that you already sense, maybe you don't, but maybe by the end of the conversation you'll have some clarity of the smell that is rising up out of us. Let me talk about the first thing. The first piece of the smell that I believe for us as a church is this, is that people matter to us because they matter to God. First and foremost, people matter to us because they matter to God. No matter what your thoughts are about God, no matter what your perspective is on God, it is absolutely essential that we look at the life of Jesus. I'll say this a million times. I've said it a million times. I'll say it a million times more. If you're trying to figure out God, you got to look at the life of Jesus. The life of Jesus gives us the picture of who God is. Jesus really lived out this beautiful image of who God is and how much people matter to him. Whether it was 10,000 people on the side of a hill, on the seashore, whatever it was, that these people mattered. He saw them as sheep without a shepherd, and he saw them without food, so he would provide for them. Why? Because they mattered to him. Or if it's a woman who's caught in adultery and the religious leader throw her at his feet and expect him to condemn her, and he forgives her because she is valued. It's not only just by his life, it's by his teachings, where we see how much God matters, how much people matter to God. There's this moment in Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 is actually the story that conference speaker used back in 1996 that spoke into our lives again and kind of sparked that flame inside of us as the importance of the church. It's Luke chapter 15. It's this beautiful story of Jesus telling the story of three scenarios of something that was of value that was lost and it was searched for. It's a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. This is a beautiful story of the example of how much we matter to God. The lost sheep, the shepherd, it says Jesus taught that the shepherd would do whatever he needed to do to find the lost sheep. He would leave the 99 alone, and he would go and he would try to find that one lost lamb. And what strikes me about this, in his search, in his pursuit of that one lost lamb, he doesn't know what he's going to find. He doesn't know if the lamb is going to be at the bottom of a ravine, if a wild animal had gotten it, or if it's just going to be wandering in the wilderness. He had no idea, but yet it says that he pursued until he found that lamb, and it described it like this, that he picks the lamb up, puts it on his shoulders, and brings the shepherd's buddies together, and he holds a party. The lost coin is a woman who, this represents her wealth, and it's lost, and she turns her house upside down to find this coin, and when she finds it, she brings her neighbors together, and she says, let's celebrate, for I have found what I have lost. But then there's the lost son. I mean, this should really grab us a little bit by our heartstrings, because there's a piece of the son story that is so fascinating. Because when you think about the sheep, that little lamb, it's just out wandering. It has no clue. It's probably lost. It's just doing what it's doing. The coin is this just stagnant thing that doesn't really know. It's just kind of sitting there. But the son makes a very determined decision to walk away from his father, because he says to his father, hey, would you give me my inheritance? Which is basically saying what? I want you dead. I can't wait for you to kick off, so can you give me my inheritance? And the father of the son gives him the inheritance, and it says that he goes and he takes it and he lives in a wild way, and he spends everything. And then he says he comes to his senses. I mean, there's much more in the story, but he comes to his senses and he realized, what have I done? I've intentionally walked away from a place where I had love and compassion and kindness, but yet I'm over here. And he comes up with a plan to go back to the Father. And then there's this moment in Luke 15, verse 20, that says this. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Something of value was missing, and the father lived with the anticipation of the son's return. I wonder if every single day the father looked down the road to see if his son was coming home. Every day just looking and wondering, will this be the day that my son returns? And when he sees him, he doesn't wait for him to get to the family property. What does he do? He runs and he grabs him and he holds him and he hugs him so tightly, I'm sure his head almost popped off, and he kisses him. He's just squeezing the life out of him because the son had returned. You know, one of the things that strikes me about the day and age in which we live, and the pressures, whether it's social media or the pressure to exceed and succeed, all this kind of stuff. I wonder if so many of us are just wondering, do I matter? Am I valued? I wonder how many people in your life right now that you run with, that have smiles on their faces every single day, deep down, they're wondering, do I matter? Do I have value? This morning, a friend of mine from high school reached out to me through Facebook from New Brunswick and said, would you pray for our city because they've had 4 suicides in 2 weeks and they're not sure what to do about it and many more attempts. She says, would you pray? There is an element of what's happening for us is that there's this deep sense of, do I matter? Do I have value? So for us as a church, I can't help but think, are we establishing an environment where people, when they come into this space or come in contact with us, do they know that they matter and that they're valued? I'm not talking about, it doesn't matter what their background is, their lifestyle, the color of their skin, what their beliefs are, what their religious background is. It doesn't matter. Do they know that they matter deeply to the Father and they matter deeply to us? Do we add value? There's this part of the matter to us and mattering to God that I love in the story in Luke 15. Some of you probably already know this, but Jesus, after each one, says, as that celebration happened, you need to know that when one returns, all of heaven celebrates. I want to be a church that causes heaven to throw a party. I want to be a church where all of heaven has to party because there are people who are finding Jesus who were once lost but are now found. That's what I want. Thanks for the woohoo. Yeah. If God's love is so deep that his Son came to this earth, went to a cross, was crucified, walked out of a tomb because of his love for us, then how much more should we be sharing that truth with those we come in contact with? How much more should we be on the search for those who matter and are valued in God's eyes? I had this thing, Instagram post sent to me last night of Andy Stanley. I've talked about Andy Stanley in the past. He's a pastor in Atlanta. And he talked about this idea in this Instagram post where when you're living in a way that people matter and people are valued and you're living on mission as a church, he gave the church this phrase in Atlanta called North Point. It's a really great phrase. He was saying that when you're in conversation with people and they start saying, well, maybe I don't go to church, you should say, well, you should come to my church. Well, life is getting tough. Well, you should come to my church. And it was interesting because he just had an answer. That was the answer. You should just come to my church. And I just thought how beautiful that is to posture ourselves in a way where we just say to people just gently and very humbly and graciously, hey, you should come to my church. Well, I'm not very religious. That's okay. Just come to my church. It's a real struggle in my life right now. Well, you should just come to my church. There's these 2 words, invest and invite, that he talked about, and words we've talked about. That as people of faith, that we're investing in those who are far from God in a genuine, true way where we care for them deeply so that we can just say, hey, why don't you come to my church? Some of you might be here today because of that. Someone might have invited you, hey, you should come to my church. And you finally just came to get them off your back. You just come to my church. People mattered to us because they matter to God. The second thing that contributes to the smell is this idea of extending grace to one another. See, if we're going to be a church where people matter, it means it's messy. It means it's a bit chaotic at times. It means at times where we're kind of wondering, whoa, what's really going on? But when I pulled it all back, I realized that each and every one of us need grace. We need the grace from God, but we also need the grace from one another because grace gives room for the journey of faith. Grace gives room for the process of faith. There's this moment in Jesus' life where he's got his friend Peter. Peter is one of the disciples of Jesus that I think I would have been friends with. I think I would really, really love Peter. I would want him close to him. I would follow him on Instagram and everything. He's just one of these guys, right? He's one of these guys, like he's all in. He's like hands in the middle, rah, we're going to take the mountain. And oftentimes he put his foot in his mouth, but who cares? He doesn't care if it's withered. He just loves being with Jesus. And this moment before Jesus goes to the cross, he tells Jesus, don't you worry, Jesus, I'm in. I'm with you. I will never deny you. And Jesus says, actually, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, I'm in. And at the apex of Jesus' moment where he's going to the cross, Peter denies him 3 times. He does the very thing that he said he wouldn't do, but he did it. I wonder what that scene was like as Jesus is being crucified and he locks eyes with Peter as Peter's denying he even knows him. What's amazing about this story is oftentimes we stop right there, but we don't look beyond that. Because a few days after Jesus rose from the dead, walked out of the tomb, what happened was Jesus actually restores Peter into a relationship with himself. Peter and his buddies are out there on the water and they're fishing, and things aren't going well. They go back to what's familiar to them because they weren't sure what to do about Jesus and the death and all that kind of stuff, and so they're going back to what's familiar. They're fishing, and they're not catching anything, and Jesus is on the shore. They can't tell who he is right away, and he says, hey, you should fish from the other side. They catch a few more fish, which is a great story, and then one of the guys in the boat says, hey, I think it's Jesus. Peter jumps out of the boat and tears to shore. He runs to shore, and he's like, and he gets there, and Jesus has a fire going. He's got some fish cooking. They're going to have some breakfast. And in this moment, this intimate, crazy, grace-filled, saturated moment, Jesus restores Peter by asking him 3 times if he loves him. 3 times denied, 3 times ask him. Grace. Listen, I know that there are some of us that have a perception of church that it's all about condemnation and judgment and shame. I get it. And for some of us, that's been our experience, and that is very real. But as I think about an environment for us, I think about this grace-filled, saturated environment that creates room for the process of faith. That grace gives room for when we mess up. Grace gives room for when life is hard. Matter of fact, grace creates the cracks so that truth may penetrate our hearts and our souls. You can tweet that if you want. Your eyes are real big, Mark. I like that. You don't have your phone. Grace creates the cracks in our souls so truth can come in. See, grace doesn't mean that we don't speak truth. Grace doesn't mean that we don't at times pray for conviction. Grace doesn't mean at times we hope. No, grace speaks into these moments. Grace doesn't go, hey, everything's going to be okay, pat you on the head like a grandfather figure. No. Grace creates the space. I was thinking about this. So as much as I would love to see our church be the excuse for heaven to party and celebrate, I also think it would be amazing to see it be a place where people run to because they know they're going to experience grace. Peter jumps out of the boat and races to shore to be with Jesus. See, one of the things that strikes me about what we do on a Sunday morning when we gather like this and we gather in midweek things and gatherings and so on and so forth is that grace paints a picture of what faith can look like, and then we encourage people to move towards it. Never do I want this to be a place of guilt and shame and finger wagging. Because grace paints a beautiful picture of life and meaning and hope within the context of a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And then we say, would you move towards that picture with us? This is where we're headed. This is where we're going. This is what we want to see happen in your life. See, grace allows that space to happen. I actually am amazed at this moment where grace allows Peter to say to Jesus, you know everything about me, Jesus. And he takes the mask off, and he's restored. You can read that actually in John 21, verse 17. He says to Jesus, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. What he's saying, with the masks off, he's saying, grace has allowed me to step into this space to be renewed and restored. Peter would go on to preach to thousands, and many would give their lives to Jesus because of grace. The last thing is this. As I think about the smell and who we are, and as we continue to move forward as a church, it's this: authentic faith relationships. So when you think about people matter to God, they're valued because they matter to us, and then we think about the grace-saturated culture and environment, I think about authentic faith relationships. See, no matter where you fall on the personality tests and all that stuff, we're all created to be in relationship. We're created by a God who exists in relationship, so therefore we have a stamp of eternity on our soul, so therefore we are created to be in relationship. And the truth is, in a church like ours that is continuing to move forward and expand and move into other towns and villages and everything, it's this idea of moving people into these authentic relationships, because here's the thing. Your faith, the depth of your faith, the strength of your faith is often determined by the depth of your relationships. Your faith was never intended to be designed to be fulfilled or happen within isolation. Matter of fact, if you think that you don't need church and other people in your life, you're believing a lie. When you look at the scriptures, when you look at the story of the early church, you begin to see that there was this movement of people that were in authentic relationship. Yes, it was chaotic. Yes, it was confusing at times. Yes, it got downright dirty at times. But there was an aspect of it where they were saying, I am going to lean into these relationships, because it's within these relationships where we begin to discover what it means to belong, what it means to care, what it means to be known, what it means to be loved. And what is so awesome about moving towards authentic faith relationships is that God often uses the voice of someone else to speak into your life. I'm so convinced more than ever that yes, God speaks through his word. Yes, God speaks through Sunday mornings like this, but I am convinced more than ever, as I have watched God speak through other people into my life, and I've witnessed it as well. A few weeks ago at a campfire with some men from Vital Point, we were gathered around a campfire at a guy's house, and this guy that we were at his house, he was sharing a story of how he was sharing with great excitement about our church, about his faith. This person that he was sharing wasn't a church person, and we could not stop this guy. He's like levitating off of his seat. It was just unbelievable. We were all listening, and then another guy on the campfire looked at him and said, you know what, I think you have the gift of evangelism. We all stopped. I jumped to my feet. I said, yes, that's exactly right. And as we spoke into this guy's life, someone else who's in small group with that guy said, hey, listen, I'm in small group with that guy. I agree. 3 people affirmed this one guy's gift of evangelism, which means he has the ability to share his faith very naturally and normally without being weird. That's the key. It was a moment I will never forget, and I believe with every ounce of my being, that God spoke through that guy, through me, and through the other, into this one guy. He looked stunned. It was awesome. His eyes were this big. He just sat there quietly. I can track people's journey in our life of our church. And no, I don't have any special cameras, so don't worry about that. But I watch people come into our environment, move towards authentic faith relationships, as confusing and difficult and scary and all that kind of stuff. Oh, it's all wrapped in there. It's okay. And I watch the roots of their faith getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I watch people come into our environment that don't have that. And they make all the excuses in the world. And I get it. I'm too busy. I'm running off my feet already. My Lego block's already full. And I watch what could potentially happen as they drift away. Authentic faith relationships secure us in an environment that allows our faith to grow and become vibrant. It's vital. So, a few months ago, I was at a cash register paying for something. And for those of you who follow me on social media the last few weeks with my wife gone to Scotland and Ireland, it wasn't a grocery store, it was a different environment. So if you don't follow me on Facebook, that's fine, I don't care. I was paying. And the woman taking my money, or helping me through the process, she said, "Are you at a coffee shop?" It's the strangest question. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "I can smell it." I want you to think about that. When we gather and leave, when we gather and scatter, do people smell you? Oh, I'm itching, and it's not because I had 3 cups of coffee this morning. Have you been to Vital Point? Have you been with Jesus? I have a fear. I have a motivational fear for us as a church. And my fear is, as we step into the next 5, that we'll become an ordinary church. That we will become a church that's so policy-driven, inward-focused, and it scares me, because that's not what I signed up for. So my question for you today, as we wrap this up and as we bring this to a close, is, will you rise up and become the smell of Vital Point Church? Talking to those of you, this is your church. And I'm talking to you in a way that I hope that you'll understand my passion and my heart and the humility, because I know that the enemy of what we're trying to do is attacking some of us, and some of us are discouraged, some of us are disappointed, some of us are allowing certain negative pattern thoughts to influence whether you're going to stay or go. And I ask, will you rise up? Will you rise up in the midst of all of it and say, I want to contribute to the smell of this church? Now, those of you who are not, maybe you're just exploring church and you're back to church for the first time, or you've been around a little bit. Let me just say this to you. You can contribute to the smell as well. You can. You can be inviting people, bringing people. You could start getting involved and start journeying and start figuring it out. And maybe one day you will become the excuse for all of heaven to throw a party. So we're together, and I ask, will you rise up? Will you rise up and walk with the values that create the smell of Vital Point? Listen to the song.